For weeks now, the Prime Minister has been telling the states privately and publicly the schools should fully reopen, that this would be the best way to start getting life back to something like post-COVID normal. It's the view of the health experts, and it's key to arresting the productivity slump that's occurred for those parents still left with a job as they try to juggle work and home schooling and find it all a bit of a struggle. Now, it's ironic, isn't it? For all their talk about listening to the science experts when it comes to climate change, Labor's got selective hearing when it comes to the medical experts, saying we need to get children back to school for their sake as much as ours. There's not a single chief health officer, including in Victoria, who thinks that it would be unsafe to reopen schools. As of now, the Liberal government in South Australia and the Labor government in Western Australia have fully reopened their schools, the Northern Territory as well. But under the influence of teacher unions, New South Wales is only allowing students back 1 day a week from next week. In Queensland, it's only years 11 and 12 that are coming back, plus Kindy 2 from next week. And in the People's Republic of Victoria, it's no school at all. And the Commandant says he won't be rushed into any schools reopening any time. Of course, most private schools, well, they've been teaching their children from home for some time, already operating pretty sophisticated online teaching portals pre-COVID. And of course, their kids have a laptop per child, often a standard issue. Not so for state schools. While families might have a computer at home, not many have one computer per child. And that's what's needed if children are expected to keep up with their online studies. For the state schools that all are supposed to have kept their doors open for essential workers, and as we've been reminded, vulnerable children, well, there's no actual teaching going on anyway. It's all been a bit of glorified childminding at best. Predictably, this has sparked more bleating from the unions about private school kids getting an unfair advantage. But of course, this is only happening because the very same unions oppose their teachers going back to work. And this whole schools standoff has itself become emblematic of the disconnect between the public and the private sector, which this corona crisis has only more exposed. While several million private sector workers have been stood down, had their pay cut, or been forced on the $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper payment at best, no public sector worker, none whatsoever, have been stood down or had their pay cut. It grates that most state school teachers are getting full pay to do not much at all, while people in the private sector who can't work because of this virus are on best JobKeeper. Politicians and the public servants, you know this, they're the ones making the decision. Well, they've had no threat to their pay. Indeed, some in Victoria are getting increases. And for all the talk of national unity and all this, we're in it all together, the states have only been united when the Commonwealth, Scott Morrison at the top of the table, has had his chequebook out. If you take a closer look, the so-called National Cabinet has not bound the premiers on anything. Whether it's opening their schools or closing the borders, the states have done pretty much exactly as they pleased. And already the other player in this education issue, the universities, well, they've started to demand the return of foreign students before we've even got our local kids back to school. Here's the Federal Education Minister on the ABC yesterday morning.
But what about some sort of exemption to allow international students to come into Australia?
Well, down the track, you know, these are things that we can look at and examine.
You will look at that?
Well, I mean, a lot of things we will look at and examine. You've got to remember, when it comes to international students, they generate huge employment here in Australia through coming here, availing themselves of our education system. That generates upwards of about 250,000 jobs nationally. So it is something that we would look at.
Now, if there's one thing that might reignite the pandemic here, it would be encouraging tens of thousands of people to come to Australia from countries where this virus is not yet under control. We should all be grateful that early border closures at a national level have helped us avoid to date the worst ravages of this disease. But the politics, as usual, disagreements on something as simple as sending kids back to school, well, that suggests we'll really struggle to avoid the economic consequences of this catastrophe unless leaders wake up and start leading with some consistency.